What kind of thing is a virtue? Aristotle says it is a good trait of character, and a vice is a bad trait of character. But that by itself does not get us very far, because we still need to know what a trait of character is. Is a trait of character something that lasts? Does it matter how it is acquired? Does it only involve behavior, or does it also involve motives? Does it matter whether the person succeeds in reaching the aims she has when she acts virtuously? The way I propose to proceed is to think of persons we admire and ask ourselves what it is about them that makes us feel admiration. When we look at them closely and for a long period of time, our admiration may increase or decrease. Narratives are very important for teaching us what the virtues are because they reveal what a person is like over an extended period of time. Over time, we can separate what we admire from what we do not admire, and that can help us identify the components of a virtue as well as the individual virtues. So the first thing to say is that a virtue is an admirable trait. It is a trait we identify through the emotion of admiration. Of course, we can be mistaken in what we admire. We may admire someone who is not admirable or fail to admire someone who is admirable. But I assume that our disposition to admire is the faculty we use to identify the admirable. We can make that disposition more reliable by reflecting on our emotion of admiration and the emotions of other people we trust. I assume next that the admirable is the excellent. We admire excellence of any kind, and that includes more than moral excellences. It includes inborn talents or gifts, like native intelligence, natural musical ability, strength, and beauty. But I think that we admire inborn qualities in a different way than excellences that are acquired through human agency. One way to see that is to look at the opposite emotion. If someone is courageous or compassionate or supremely just, we admire him. And if he is cowardly or cruel or unjust, we feel an emotion like contempt or disdain. But my admiration for the musically gifted does not have an opposite emotion. If someone lacks musical ability, I generally do not feel anything at all. In some cases, I might feel pity, but I don't feel contempt or disdain. I propose then that a virtue in the sense we mean for virtue ethics is an acquired excellence. Inborn qualities are not admirable in the right way for the theory. When we look at people we admire in stories, films, or in our personal lives, the most obvious thing we admire about them is their behavior. They act in ways that attract our attention and makes us admire them. Sometimes the acts are heroic. Recently, I saw a movie about Leopold Socha, a Polish sewer inspector and a former petty thief who made great sacrifices to hide Jews in the sewers of Lvov for 14 months during World War II. Socha brought them food, medicine, games, prayer books, and crucial information about the outside world. Some died, some escaped and were shot, but 10 of them survived. At first, Socha hid them for money, but when their money ran out, he continued to hide and protect them out of concern for their welfare. I think this story reveals some things about the components of virtue. I admire an ongoing disposition to behave in a particular admirable way more than a one-time act of kindness. We think that a disposition to act repeatedly in helping others expresses something deeper in the person than acts that are performed only once or occasionally. Few people are so heroic or saintly that they perform acts of kindness or generosity at every opportunity. But we think of the most admirable qualities as those that involve an enduring disposition. But is behavior all that counts? Do the motives make any difference? Socha first hid the Jews out of a motive for monetary gain, but later his motive changed, and he did it purely out of compassion. In fact, he said that he loved them. I admire him much more when his motive was compassion or love than when he did it for the money. If you agree with me, that suggests that a virtue is not simply a disposition to act in a certain way, but to have certain motives in acting. We admire compassion much more than a motive for personal gain. I want to propose one more component of virtue that is more controversial than the other components we see in this story. We admire persons not only for what they try to do, but for what they succeed in doing. If two people rush into a burning building to save the people inside, and one of them succeeds in saving a life, while the other one pulls out someone who dies anyway, do we admire them both the same? I'm inclined to say yes, but that is because they are acting on a single occasion with only one chance at success. What if all the people Socha was hiding died before they could come out of hiding? Would we admire him just as much? I doubt that there would be movies and books about him, but that might only mean that we prefer stories of success. If he did everything he could and they died because of something he couldn't prevent, we would probably admire him just as much. Maybe we would have admired the people who participated in the civil rights movement just as much if the movement ultimately failed. In fact, many participants did fail in their aims, and it was only later that there was success. I think we will want to say they were admirable, whether or not the movement succeeded. We have a different opinion of people who regularly fail at reaching the goal of their virtuous acts because of their own stupidity or ineptness. Imagine somebody who always seems to make pain worse when they're trying to alleviate pain, or someone who regularly gives to charities that are fraudulent and the money doesn't help anybody. To some extent, we probably think that every virtue requires reasonably good practical judgment. We all should have enough good sense and information about the consequences of our acts that we don't make mistakes that could be easily avoided. We are not really compassionate if we don't know how to alleviate suffering. We are not really generous if we do not take the trouble to find out how our money is being used. But these cases do not settle the matter of whether success is part of virtue, because there is a deeper question lurking in the background. A virtue is a quality that makes its bearer admirable. But does it also have to make the world a better place? Must a virtue be a disposition to act in ways that generally succeed in making the world better? I am inclined to say yes, but this is a controversial position. I know of some interesting empirical studies that relate to this question. In one study, subjects were asked to describe courageous acts they had heard of. Most described an act that succeeded. In another study, subjects were asked to rank the degree of courage of a number of different acts. Successful actions were rated as more courageous than acts that were identical except that they did not succeed. Even more interesting is the effect of the subject's endorsement of the goals of a person's act when they judge whether or not the person acted courageously. One study showed that people have mixed reactions to the question of whether the 9/11 terrorists acted courageously. Some thought that calling them courageous implied endorsing the terrorists' goals, and so they denied that they were courageous. Other subjects thought that the terrorists could be called courageous because courage is a matter of facing danger for what one believes in, whether or not it is correct. The 9/11 terrorists were successful from their point of view, but whether or not they had courage depends upon whether you think courage is a virtue and that a virtue must be something that reliably leads to making the world a better place. In my book, Virtues of the Mind, I proposed a definition of a virtue that is similar to what we have been saying so far. A virtue is a deep and enduring acquired excellence of the human person that includes a disposition to behave in an admirable way, out of an admirable motive, and reliable success in reaching the end of that motive. I will leave it open for discussion whether the end must be a good one from an objective viewpoint, and whether virtue requires reliable success in reaching an end that is good from either the agent's perspective or the perspective of an objective observer. Either way, I think this definition can serve to shape our discussion of a host of moral, intellectual, and civic virtues.